Thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to all the people who submitted questions. We have a number of different kind of questions. Um, and of course, as we always do, if people have questions about what we discussed, please feel free to put something in the chat. And then once I get through all the submitted questions, then I'll come back to the chat. If you're not comfortable putting something in the chat, then once we've gone through the chat, we'll give the opportunity for people to call out questions as well. With everyone's forgiveness, I just need to say hello to John Golan for a moment because it's been a while since I've seen his lovely face. Nice to see you, John. Okay, but it's nice to see everybody. Okay, okay. I did try to organize these out. A few questions to start with. Scenario number one: a pot of chicken soup is boiling over the stove. May a person pour spices directly from the spice jar into the soup, or does that make the rest of the spices in the jar meat? What this question is getting at is an interesting halacha concept called zeya. Zeya is steam. In halacha, when steam is generated, and of course, if steam is generated, it's of a heat of Yad Soletisbo, a significant heat in halacha. If the steam goes up into something else, then and it's still hot at the spot where it goes into that thing, then it's like hot chicken or something being put against that. So the question is, if a person has a pot of bubbling chicken soup, so it's a fleishik soup, and they want to pour some salt or whatever spice into it, and the spice container, they're holding it pretty close over the soup. So there's all this steam coming up. So does that render the rest of the contents fleischigs? That's definitely a reasonable question. Question number two, related. A person has dairy hot cocoa powder in a mug, and they take that mug that has dairy hot cocoa powder in it, and they stick it under a Keurig or under a hot water urn. And so then they turn on the hot water, and this boiling water comes into the mug, mixes, of course, with the dairy hot cocoa powder, and then generates a steam that comes right back up towards the mouth, towards the spout of the urn. Does that make the spout dairy? That is question number two. And finally, the third question in this set: person is sauteing onions in a pan. The onions were cut with a meat knife, and the person says they need to add more oil. These scenarios are great, by the way. The person says they need to add more oil. So if a person pours the oil directly from the jug of oil over the onions, and then there's some like steam that comes up from the frying pan, does the steam generated from the onions in the frying pan impact the remaining oil in the jug? These are all very similar questions, but I hope through these different scenarios, a person can hopefully relate to the questions in different ways. So what I personally would say is that for all of these scenarios, it is an appropriate thing to be conscientious about. I would recommend that a person be conscientious about it. So practically speaking, what that would mean is that if a person wanted to pour some spices into the pot of boiling soup that is generating steam, they're best off either holding the spices up kind of from a greater height, or um, pouring the spices into something and then pouring from that thing into the pot of soup. Um, I would say a similar thing in terms of the jug of oil. But the bottom line is, if it happened, I don't think it's a crisis. In other words, I don't, I personally, I'm not sure that every rabbi would say the same, but I personally would not say, oh gosh, all those spices can only be used with fleischiks now. I would say it's preferable to not create that situation in the first place. Similarly, by the way, in terms of the hot water urn and the dairy hot cocoa powder, um, I really would recommend to not do it that way. A person, if they're going to have something milchiks, a person can kind of empty from the urn into just like a disposable cup or something, and then pour it from there, into the mug. I would say that's better, but if a person did it otherwise, I would not say, oh my gosh, you have to start kashering everything and you have to start getting three different urns and all that stuff. I wouldn't go that far. But it's a very reasonable question. So I would say that ideally a person should be conscientious about that stuff, but I think there's enough to rely on that if it happened, it's not, you don't have to redo the world. Okay. Um, Another category of questions. This has to do with buying products from establishments that are not certified kosher. This is an extremely common question and a very valid question. Person gets cut up fruit. The person goes into Costco and gets cut up fruit. Person goes into Giant and gets cut up fruit. I want to be very clear. We're not talking about something like onions or something which is, like a sharp food. It's all cold. Um, is that a halachic concern? In other words, it's certainly not under kosher certification. It's certainly not under kosher supervision. Is that a problem? Or to say it differently, do I have to be worried that the knife that with which the watermelon or whatever it is was cut um, was used to cut non-kosher stuff and hasn't been cleaned? Does a person have to be worried about that? So that's a very good question. The common approach, uh, to the best of my understanding, is it sort of depends on the magnitude, on the volume of product that's coming out of the establishment. So something like, I mean, here's the question. Whoever is in the back, wherever they are, and they're sitting there cutting watermelon with a knife, what are the odds that that knife or that cutting board was used 20 minutes ago to cut some non-kosher fish? Okay. So if it's one of these things that's like, manufactured and produced and then circulated to stores around the country or around the region, there's no way that that they use that knife for anything other than cutting that watermelon. You know what I mean? It's certainly not that it's still dirty. Um, Even if it's a big place, you'll forgive my ignorance. I'm not inviting comment at this time. People are welcome to put something in the chat. I don't know the physical reality when if a person buys cut up fruit from Costco. I don't know if it was actually cut up at that given Costco or it's shipped from some big Costco in the sky. I don't know how this works exactly. But even if it was cut up at the Costco, I think it's fair to assume that they're working in such large scale. I don't think a person has to worry about it. Um, if a person is getting some cut up fruit from like Giant or something like that, I think it's worth checking out. And it probably is labeled more or less, or at least you can figure out from the labeling, I would guess, if it was just like sort of mass produced and circulated, in which case I wouldn't worry about it, or if it seems to be much more mom and pop type of. My guess is Giant also probably is more mass produced. That's my guess. But if it was a place like Snyder's or something like that, I would think it could be that it's some company sent out cut fruit, but if not, if it's like Snyder's did it, my guess is it's some guy in the back cutting up some fruit. And who knows what else he cut up with that knife on that cutting board. So, broadly speaking, I want to emphasize I'm not talking about things like onions and things like that. I'm not talking about things that would be hot, but something that all fruit is okay. Um, that I really wouldn't be worried about it if the nature, either of the nature of how it's packaged or the nature of the establishment seems to be that they cut up a lot at one time of fruit. Now, this was not asked, but to the extent that I got up, that I'm on this topic, I just want to say, because this totally comes up. What about if you go into Costco and you get fresh salmon? Okay, you get fresh salmon. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a detour now. So first of all, I also want to make sure people are aware if you're buying from a place that's not kosher certified, the normal halacha is you're not supposed to rely on the establishment to tell you what type of fish it is, or to say it more specifically, to ascertain for you that it's a kosher species of fish. We know what it takes to be a kosher fish if it has fins and scales on it. So if you see the piece of fish and it still has what the term is, the skin is on it, it's still, you can still see the fins and scales. So of course you see it's a kosher fish. Um, if the skin is no longer on it and you can't see the fish and the fins and scales, so the fact that they tell you it's a tilapia fish, you're really not supposed to rely on that unless it's a kosher observant Jew telling you that. For the record, salmon, according to many, many authorities, is a different story. And the reason why, not according to all authorities, but according to many authorities, salmon is a different story. And the reason why salmon is a different story is a very interesting thing, that the color of salmon among fish is a very unique color. So since the color of salmon is a unique color, even if you can't see the fins and scales, you can see, well, if it looks like salmon, then it is salmon. Fine. Um, so let's say you're talking about a fillet of salmon, a fresh fillet of salmon, not with one of these packages that has an OU on it, whatever. Just from behind the counter, a fresh fillet of salmon or a fresh fillet of another type of fish that the skin is on it. So there, that's a much greater concern than the example we had with the fruit, because the fruit, gosh, if they're cutting watermelon or pineapple or whatever it is, so what do I care? A little bit of watermelon, a little bit of pineapple, it's all kosher. But in the place in the back that they're cutting the fish, it could very well be that at 2:30 in the afternoon they were cutting salmon, and at 2:15 in the afternoon they were cutting a swordfish. I don't know, and it's not so distant. So there, the commonly this is I know what Rabbi used to tell people that what makes sense in that situation if you're buying a fresh fillet from such a place is that it makes sense to, when you get home, run the surface of the cut under cold water and sort of vigorously rub the surface where you're along the whole surface of the cut. Okay, back to fruit related things. Person orders a drink in a hotel lobby. Um, or they go and they get a drink at a hotel lobby, and there's cut lemons in the vessel that the water comes out of, or in the person's cup. Um, what's the story with that? Again, just to sort of jump in from where we left off before, uh, it's extremely plausible that if it's some restaurant, a hotel lobby, or something like that, it's extremely plausible that it's not that like they sat there cutting pieces of lemons, for who knows how long, and that they never ever would use another knife or they never ever would use another cutting board. There's certainly reasonable grounds to be concerned. And by the way, a lemon is a sharper type of food in the first place, which means the ability of the lemon to absorb taste from the knife with which it's cut, even if it's all cold, is of a whole different scale than watermelon or pineapple. So, what does that mean for my cup of water that has a lemon inside of it? So, what does that mean practically? So, the standard answer, it's a very good question. The standard answer seems to be that the lemon does not render the drink non kosher, even if I do have reason to be concerned about the knife with which the lemon was cut, because whatever the small non-kosher taste absorbed lemon will be, there's so much more in the cup. The contents of the cup would nullify whatever the effect of the knife on the lemon. But I shouldn't actually bite into the lemon. You know what I mean? I shouldn't actually eat the piece of lemon. That's an interesting distinction. Um, okay. Um, fine. Another interesting question out of melons and lemons. person is staying over in a hotel and they come down to the lobby in the morning and there's cereal and they see it's very clear it's Cheerios. It's very obviously a standard cereal. They see the box that the Cheerios are coming from. It seems to be a kosher cereal, or yeah, let's just say it seems to be a kosher cereal. Um, so is there a problem having kosher cereal with regular milk? That most of us would feel perfectly fine walking into any random place and getting milk without a kosher certification with a cold, clean bowl and a cold, clean spoon, but it's not a kosher establishment. So that bowl and spoon, it's distinctly possible it has been used before with non-kosher stuff. It's distinctly possible it's washed with non-kosher stuff. I mean, all that kind of concern. So the bottom line is um, the standard approach in halacha, there's an Aruch HaShulchan that talks about this, the standard approach in halacha is as long as one is partaking of it on a temporary basis, we can be lenient about it. So if I'm having breakfast in the hotel lobby, I don't have to worry about it. But it should not be that I go to a yard sale and I buy bowls and spoons and whatever it is, and I just say, well, if it was good enough for the hotel lobby, it's good enough for my kitchen, used stuff and not koshering it, that would not be appropriate. But if it's just a temporary thing, and everything is cold, and again, we're not dealing with sharp foods or anything like that, then that should be okay. Okay, next question. Person buys a second-hand table. Okay, you go to a yard sale or an estate sale, whatever it is, and you buy a table. You have no reason to believe that the table that the original owners of the table kept kosher. May you use the table without covering it with a tablecloth? It's an interesting question. Um, so let's just go in steps here. If that's a breakfast table for you, and you bought the table cleaned, and all you ever do on the table is have your cold cereal and milk, I don't think it's, as long as you were confident that the surface of the table was clean when you got it, I don't think it's a great concern. But if like this is like your table, you eat hot stuff on it and things like that, then I would really think either that you would be particular about using a tablecloth with it, or if you didn't want to use a tablecloth, it would be appropriate to kasher the table. It's an interesting thing to think about. Um, if the table was made of wood or metal, whatever it is, stone, there's certain surfaces you can kasher, certain surfaces you can't kasher. But if you wanted to have hot stuff on the table and you didn't want to use a tablecloth, it probably would be appropriate to kasher the table, similar to how we would kasher countertops. Um, yeah, so you would clean it and you would boil water, and you would pour boiling water on the table. But again, if you're having it just for cold, I really wouldn't worry about this. And if you want to just always use it with a tablecloth, I wouldn't worry about it either. Okay. Um, okay, interesting question. Carve knife. This is like, I almost feel like I should change my voicemail to say, "This is Rabbi Dovid Rosenbaum. Please feel free to leave a message after the tone. And if you made a mistake with a dishwasher, it's probably not as bad as you think it is." I feel like that should be what the message says. It's obviously it's a very stressful question. Generally speaking, of course, if something happened with the dishwasher, it's always appropriate to contact your local rabbi. But generally speaking, if something happens with the dishwasher, it almost always does not mean the whole dishwasher is now treif. It might mean that certain, that the thing that didn't belong in the dishwasher might need to be kashered. Again, it's always good to check, but generally speaking, that's going to be the situation. So just, it is okay to breathe before you call with the dishwasher question. And it's always some family member who should be more careful. And just on the topic of family members who should be more careful, I have to tell the story of what got me exempt from doing work in the kitchen for years when I was a boy. When I was a little boy, I had a glass and I asked my mother, I was trying to be a good kid. I asked my mother what I should do with the glass. And my mother assumed that I had a bit of seichel, poor assumption. She said, throw it in the sink. So I did. I tossed it into the sink. She told me to throw it in the sink. So I was a very literal kid, tossed it in the sink, and that got me out of the kitchen for I think until I got married. But in any event, so all kinds of well-meaning people make mistakes in the kitchen. But in any event, if there was a parve knife in the meat dishwasher, um, depending on the type of thing, the knife could be used is used for example, if the knife was going to be something that you'd cut onions with or something like that, it probably would make sense to kasher the knife. Probably would make sense. If it wasn't going to be used for sharp things, probably would wait 24 hours. My guess is that's something that it's best to contact the rabbi with the specifics of the situation. Um, okay, this is a little bit of a sensitive question. I want to answer it appropriately. The question posed was if there's a person who eats in dairy or vegan out, could is it reasonable to rely on their kashrus in their home if they eat dairy or vegan out? Um, it's a fair question. It's not a ridiculous question. I think the best response that I could have for that is it's probably best to discuss it with your local Orthodox rabbi with the details of the circumstances. That's probably the best answer. But I will say I don't think it's an obvious answer one way or the other, but it's an extremely reasonable question. And I definitely would discourage one from eating in the home until one would discuss it with halachic authority to try to get a little bit better handle. It's an important shiloh. That's what I would say. It's um, to eat, uh, both dairy and vegan. There are some real kashrus problems that could originate in a restaurant that's not under certification. Again, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that there would be a one size fit all answer across the board for all situations, but it's probably worth it to discuss with halachic authority. Okay. Um, so I apologize. I had missed one. I sort of try to organize the questions in a structured way. There are still more questions I want to get to, but there's a list of extremely practical questions that I just realized right before we started that I had missed one email. So I apologize if this is not organized well. Question number one. If a person finds a bug in their vegetables after having cooked them, may a person eat the vegetables? It's an interesting question. It's a good question. So I would say, as a general rule, that a person may eat the vegetables, but they definitely have to make sure to separate the bug from the food before partaking of the vegetables. And of course, if they see that there's more than one bug uh, in the vegetables, then already they should really be asking a shiloh because maybe the assumption is that it wasn't, that it was really infested in the first place. But assuming for a moment that it doesn't seem to be infested, it just is find the bug after it was cooked, I would say that the food may still be eaten, but they should make sure to separate the bug out. It's a very good question. Um, okay. Okay. Super, super practical question. A person cuts onions on a meat cutting board. Person cuts onions on a meat cutting board. Should the person be putting those onions in a parve soup? And I'll just fill in the question. I believe the person's intent here is that they want the pot in which they're cooking the parve soup to remain parve. Um, So my recommendation, it's a fascinating thing about a davar for sharp food. Onions is one of the classic examples of being a sharp food. The basic story with a davar like an onion, is we normally hold the normal halacha is both the knife and the cutting board both impart taste the onion and have taste imparted from the onion. So if a person cuts an onion on a meat cutting board, you have to understand what it means that it's a meat cutting board, by the way. Uh, let's say, for example, a person cuts hot meat on that cutting board. So it's really this real absorption of meat in it. Um, Certainly, lechatchila, I would say it's not a good idea to be putting those cut onions in a parve soup, in a parve pot. I would say that's not a good idea. If it happened, I would definitely say it's worth it to call one's local rabbi before one renders decisions. But basically, it's interesting. To each their own. I'm sure some of you have heard me say this before. I think the most common kashrus question I'm asked, maybe having to do with dishwashers, but maybe number two has to do with parve. I think for some people, parve dishes and parve cutting boards and parve knives are a lifesaver. I think for other people, this parve stuff actually makes things more complicated. So broadly speaking, I think the way to handle parve board knife is either, to me, the smartest way to do it, there are people who all the vegetables that they cut on a parve cutting board and a parve knife. And then once they've cut it, they distribute it to whatever, whatever milchiks thing, whatever fleischiks thing. That's how they run it. Um, and if that works for people, amazing. Um, Other people sort of have like they have their fleischiks cutting board and knife, and their milchiks cutting board and knife, and their parve cutting board and knife. If that works for them, also amazing. Um, Many people say to themselves, okay, let me just decide. Is this onion being cut for a fleischiks, for fleischiks preparation or for milchiks preparation? Even if all the stuff is parve, let me just think through, what kind of pot am I using? And they just sort of are consistent all the way through. Um, but what does trip people up a lot is this kind of situation. A person cut an onion with a fleischiks knife or a fleischiks board, and then they put the onion in the parve pot. And then there's all these shilas. What's the status of the pot at this point in time? So what I find, just anecdotally, and this is whatever works for people, but what I find for people who have a separate parve thing, I find that what works the best is if they sort of start that everything starts parv and then they filter out from there. I think people frequently get very mixed up. Um, but if it works for someone, amazing. But I'll just say this is a very common question, very reasonable question. Um, this is a great question as well. I just cooked chicken soup on burner A. Fine. I just cooked chicken soup on burner A. I just took it off the burner. 5 minutes later, um, I have Milchig's cream of broccoli soup, and I want to put it on a burner. Can I put that on burner A? That's the question. So I want to talk about burners for a moment. My guess is that the majority of people on this Zoom do not have Milchigs versus Fleischigs burners. My guess is the majority of people have their burners. Their burners are their burners. What's what's that about? So here's the story. The assumption with a burner is if you're using the burner, hopefully it gets the surface pretty hot. If it doesn't get the surface pretty hot, it's probably not such a burner to write home about in the first place. So the assumption is that whatever residue is on the burner essentially gets burnt off so quickly that we're really not that worried. If I use the burner for chicken soup and then I use the burner for cream of broccoli soup. Now, I want to mention a very important exception. If I spilled, sometimes a person totally spills something across their stovetop, and there's like like fleishig soup that's like all over this burner, and I haven't cleaned off the burner yet. And by the way, I haven't made anything else on the burner yet. And then all of a sudden, I put down my milchig's cream of broccoli pot on that same burner. And then I turned the burner on, and there's all this fleishik soup on the surface. I probably just trafed up that pot and that burner, by the way. So if, to my knowledge, before I put on the next type of item, the burner is clean, I'm okay. I don't mean I have to start, scrubbing the burner. But if, to the best of my understanding, the burner is clean, I'm okay. I can go milchiks, fleischiks, milchiks. It's all fine. Um, if if I know that the burner is dirty with one type of food, then I really need to make sure it's really clean before I put on the other type of food. That's making sense to everybody. Now, I want to clarify. I'm sure some people are wondering. So if I go to an Airbnb that's not a kosher kitchen and I want to use the burner, everybody knows what's the first thing I do. I kasher the burner. So which one is it? I'm talking about shifting back and forth between fleischiks and milchiks because the burner gets so hot, it's all fine. And yet, if we go to an Airbnb, we kasher the burner before we use it. So how does this work? So in halacha, the fact that this was a non-kosher, if someone is making non-kosher food on the burner, that's a more strict matter than if a person's making kosher food on the burner and I just don't want to mix the milchiks with the fleischiks. So the level of stringency is greater. That's the difference. And certainly, by the way, when we're koshering our kitchens for Pesach, right? I hope nobody got stressed out just now. It's many months until Pesach. When we're koshering our kitchens for Pesach, certainly we're very strict about Pesach. So certainly we kosher the burners. Okay. Um, okay, these were great questions. We're almost done with the submitted questions, which were really good. This is a little bit more rapid fire. Um, okay, the question posed is as follows. What foods and drinks may one buy that don't require a hechsher? Okay, so I have two proposals for this. The first proposal is just called Barbara Price. That was a joke. That was a joke, but many of us do that. But the second proposal is I think this is the most practical resource that I came across. Um, the CRC, by the way, besides the fact that they know how to pronounce words in a very good way, it's Chicago, so they're the people of the country who pronounce things correctly. The CRC has an excellent website, informative on so many things. And by the way, relative to many other organizations, pretty moderate. And it's definitely reliable. I wouldn't say it's the most strict, but if you see it on the CRC site, just as an aside, I would say the three sites, and I don't mean this to the exclusion of other sites, but the three well-traveled sites for Kashrus, I would say if you see something on there, you can totally rely on it, even though they don't necessarily agree with each other. That's okay. Rabbis sometimes disagree. Don't tell anybody. The CRC, the OU, and the Star K are all highly reliable, and their sites are very, very good. Specifically on this question of what type of things don't require a certification in the first place, if you go to crckosher.org, that is the CRC's website, they have you can click on something. I believe it's called lists. I believe and in lists there's something called the food and beverage list. And I think this is the most practical. It's an alphabetized things. This does need hashgacha, that doesn't need hashgacha. Obviously, obviously, the basic assumption a person should have when they're going shopping is that things should have certification. But there are all kinds of products. Whether does it really need certification? Does it not really need certification? If you want to just check quickly, to the best of my knowledge, that's probably the most accessible, reliable source. Um, Again, on the CRC site, there's something they call the food and beverage list, and it's just this doesn't need hashgacha, that doesn't need hashgacha. I think it's and it's alphabetized. I think it's pretty good. By the way, and on that site, there's all kinds of other lists. I think they probably have, what drinks require hashgacha, what drinks are okay, I should say, like sodas and things like that. Um, okay, next question. Um, Pre-washed, triple washed bag salads that don't have a kosher certification on them, should there be something else that happens to them before use? Um, I would say yes. I would say something else should happen to them before use. I'll tell you, I know to many on the Zoom, this is going to sound so like, gosh, 50 years ago, people were not this particular about stuff. It's a very reasonable point. Um, I would say two things. First of all, there's the research and resources of Kashrus organizations today is awesome. And the diligence and the professionalism, I'm not joking. Don't laugh. In the major Kashrus, to the best of my knowledge, all the major Kashrus organizations have someone whose focus is bug-related matters. Now, I just want to say, I'm really glad I don't have that job, by the way. I don't think I would like that job, but kol hakavod. I mean, there are people who this is what they focus on, and they're constantly researching and they're constantly assessing methods. Um, I don't want to name the organization because I would feel horrible if I was saying something slightly incorrect. But one of the major conscious organizations that certifies bag salads, I don't know if you ever have had the experience. It's very weird. Certain hashgachas and certain products of bag salads, sometimes there is hashgacha on it, sometimes there's not hashgacha on it. What's going on? So, to the best of my understanding, they have a method on the lettuce or whatever else are issues in the bagged salad, and they run the method. And then once they've run the method, they do a random testing of some of that lettuce after they've run the method. Did they find bugs afterwards or not? And the vast majority of the time, after they run that method, they don't find bugs afterwards. They say, okay, so it was good. And sometimes they run that method and they find bugs afterwards. So that means, that I guess it was a higher infestation, whatever it is. So the method probably didn't suffice. So that's why sometimes there is ashgach on it, sometimes there's not ashgach on it. So I mentioned that just because it even the certifications that have a method, they like have some level of check afterwards. So I would really strongly encourage people that if you're going to get bag salad, to get bag salad with a kosher certification if you don't want to check it for yourself. Um, okay. Is it necessary to check grapes for insects? So it seems the common thing that's encouraged among kosher organizations is and obviously you're going to wash off the grapes anyway, but when you wash off the grapes, you should just sort of break them into. It shouldn't be this huge bunch of grapes, because when it's this huge bunch of grapes, probably some of the grapes don't even get washed off in the first place. So kind of break them into sort of smaller clusters when you wash them off. But basically, once you wash off the grapes, as long as you're confident that each grape got washed, that's good enough. You don't need to start checking it. The question is it necessary to check non-leafy green vegetables for insects? I'm sorry. I would recommend to just sort of do a quick check on these lists. But generally speaking, I believe the answer is no. But it doesn't hurt to just check real fast. Does this vegetable need check? But most of them, if it's not leafy, you don't, as long as you're confident that it's clean, most of them it's okay. But it doesn't hurt to just check one of these lists every now and then. The organizations have wonderfully clear lists. Um, okay, I have one more thing here. It's a little bit of a sort of a scenario. Um, okay, I'm just going to read it. I hope you'll bear with me. Okay, person was working as a mashgicha in a large campus kitchen. She found eggs on the bottoms of spinach leaves, not so appetizing. And they were like all over the bottoms of the leaves. Uh, it was clearly a very significant infestation. I don't even want to use the next word because I'm worried I'll gross some people out, but it was clearly an issue. So she threw the whole batch in the garbage, which that makes sense to me. Then on another occasion, um, she found some eggs. She scratched, nothing came out. Um, and she asked the supervising rabbi, and the rabbi said, "Yeah, you could assume it's kosher." Um, It's an interesting, I guess what I want to bring out from this example, and then the question is like, is there a concern if it's sat for a certain period of time that maybe things developed in a different way? I want to bring out, and I'll be candid with you, I was very surprised by this. Um, we had, by the way, I neglected to thank Miriam Friedman for organizing at the beginning. I don't know if Miriam's on. Baruch Hashem, Miriam and Steve, Baruch Hashem, they had their first grandchild. The bris was this morning in New York. Mazel tov to the Friedmans. Miriam is the regular organizer of this program. And Miriam also, if I'm not mistaken, we've had different times Rabbi Tendler from the Star K, who's very involved with bug checking and things like that, came to do a presentation. And I found this very interesting. So he said that there are certain, even if there's a product, let's say raisins or something like that, there's a product that has a kosher certification on it. But let's say the raisins are very old. In other words, let's say you bought it and it's been sitting, on the shelf or more likely in your cabinet uh, for weeks and weeks and weeks. So it's possible that I hope I'm not grossing anybody out, but it's possible that bugs develop in the raisins over time. So, and it was very funny. I was very surprised. I said to him, but there's a reliable hashgacha on it. He says, yeah, but all the hashgacha is saying is that in sort of its current state, it's good. So in terms of insects and stuff, it's a little bit of a moving target. Menashe, I'm sure you could do some kind of pun with that, but but it is a little bit of a moving target. So it's the anecdote is definitely instructive. Um, Again, I don't mean it to be stressful, but if an extended period of time passed, what was good today might not be good in a week from now. So something to think that they keep in mind. Okay, I'm going to go through the chats now. Okay, so thank you very much. The question that was submitted, this thing that I said about the color of the salmon is unique, and therefore, even if you don't see the fins and the scales on the salmon, if it looks like salmon, you could treat it as salmon. Um, to the best of my knowledge, the only fish that we normally say that for is salmon. The question was specifically asked about tuna. To the best of my knowledge, we don't say that for tuna. Um, don't ask me what fish looks like tuna. I couldn't tell you, but to the best of my knowledge, that's the accepted thing. Thank you for raising that. Um, oh, really good question. Thank you for raising that. Okay. Um, okay. Many times a person opens a package of chicken and there are broken bones or it looks kind of bloodied. What's what is someone supposed to do with that? Um, okay, so I want to talk about that for a minute or two. I'm really glad you brought that up. Okay, let me just explain the concept first of all. One of the most misused words in halacha, in my opinion, is the word treifa. Okay. We use treifa as it's this catch-all word for non-kosher. And if people want to use it, don't worry, I'm not going to start screaming at you if you call me with a shiloh. It's fine. But technically speaking, treifa is actually a very narrow thing. Treifa is a kosher species that maybe even was shechted appropriately that incurred an injury. Treifa literally means torn, that the animal incurred an injury and that injury renders it non-kosher. So here's the question. If I have a package of chicken, one of the classic things that could render an animal non-kosher is broken bones. So if I have a package of chicken and I see that the bones are broken, so what does that mean? I mean, there's five different ashkachas on the package, but what does that mean? Okay, so so first of all, um, I should note that in the establishments and the slaughterhouses and the establishments, there are people whose job it is to check the items, on the line. Uh, Having said that, there's no way that everybody catches everything. There's no way. It is distinctly possible that, I hope I'm not making anyone uncomfortable, they have these packages of chicken. These things are being thrown all over the place and dropped and this and that. It's distinctly possible that the animal was completely well until it was shechted and not at all a treifa. And yeah, the bone broke. It was who knows how many boxes it's been in and this and that and thrown across a room, whatever. Um, so okay, so the fact alone that there's a broken bone would not be a concern. Okay. Um, Broadly speaking, if in the spot of the break there's a strange discoloration, it's like blue or something like that, like the meat in the spot of the break is a strange discoloration, um, or there's like an excessive amount of blood right in the spot of the break, those would be worthy of asking a shaila about. I will say, there are definitely people in this community who call me. They have shilas about chickens. You should feel free to give me a call, and people bring it over, and um, including my wife, by the way. She doesn't. I mean, I'm home already, but no, but I mean, people there definitely should feel free to call me. But if it's not, if I would only consider it a shaila if it's like discolored or if it's an excessive amount of blood or what looks like blood in the spot of a break. The other thing is specifically where forgive me, where you hold a pokey or we hold a drumstick, whatever term you want to use. At that spot, if there's a if there's a lot of redness there, that could be a shaila as well. Um, Now I'll mention if a person buys a whole chicken and something is in it that's a shiloh, then really the shiloh is relevant to the whole chicken. If a person buys a package of thighs or quarters or whatever it is, then the shiloh is only relevant to that piece. Because who knows? In other words, I don't know what other thighs in this package are from the same creature that had that. You know what I mean? So if, for example, you came across something that's a shiloh, so if you have like a package of quarters or thighs or breasts, whatever it is, if there's one piece that's a shiloh, you could set aside that piece and you could proceed to make everything else, if that makes sense. Um, I will tell you for the record, there are definitely very reliable authorities today who say, "Oh my gosh, it's all good, it's all okay." But Rabbeinu Zichron Bracha was a very real thing by him. That people would bring him, and he showed me what to do, and so I certainly in our own home we're particular about it, and if people have questions, you should please feel free to contact me. Okay, let's see what else. Thank you for raising that. That was very okay. Thank you, Menashe. Menashe, we can always count on Menashe. He also mentions kosherquest.org is a good reference in terms of what does and doesn't require ashgacha. Thank you. Thank you very much. Um, um, to the best of my knowledge, if undeveloped insect eggs were on leaves, I think it would be appropriate to remove the eggs from the leaves, to the best of my knowledge. To the best of my knowledge. Um, okay. Okay, thank you for this question. Okay, what's the story with separate ovens in terms of milk and meat? Now, let me just preface with what I'm about to say. There's all kinds of opinions when it comes to oven use. So what I'm going to say is right. And if you don't do that, you're wrong. I'm joking. That was a joke. In other words, but there are all kinds of approaches. So if the approach that you heard is from a reliable source, don't worry. Don't worry. But I'll just tell you when people ask me, what I tell people. Okay, so if a person has only one oven, so I think it makes sense to generally decide the oven is primarily either meat or dairy. Okay. Now, let's say the oven, you decide that the status of the oven is going to be meat. So now, is there a way to make dairy in that oven? So what I would recommend is as follows. First of all, if it's something that's of a dry nature, so for example, like some kind of cake or something like that, that's pretty dry, not like a liquid sauce type of thing. Um, then what's the whole concern here? Similar, by the way, to what we were talking about, similar to what we were talking about in terms of the burner before. An oven rack, I mean, an oven rack is not clean, but you don't really see food on an oven rack. Whatever food normally, has been burnt pretty much. Uh, so, I mean, if you had, um, I'm sorry, the primary concern in an oven has to do with steam. We were talking about steam before, but this is very different because it's like an enclosed area. So steam in this context is much more strict than we were talking about before with cups and urns and things like that. So, if I had a dairy cake that I wanted to bake in my meat oven, I would say it's okay. I would say you should make sure that there's no uncovered meat in the oven at the same time as the uncovered dairy. I would say that. But as long as the rack is clean, okay, again, I don't mean spotless, but I just mean there's not like a piece of meat lying on the rack. As long as the rack is clean, I would say one could bake uncovered dry dairy in the meat oven. If it's something that's of a liquidous nature or sauce or something like that, then I would say a person really has to do is they really have to seal the dairy item in a way that steam won't escape, the seal, um, and won't get into the item. Um, that broadly is what I would say. I hope that answered the question. Um, okay, thank you for asking that, John. DE, dairy equipment. What's the story with dairy equipment? This is also like very confusing. And here's the bottom line. If there's something made with dairy equipment, what it really means is it's not supposed to be eaten with fleischigs. It's not supposed to be eaten with fleischigs. So more than once, we had the good fortune to product of our community, Rabbi Zusha Blech, Zechron Levracha, was speaking once in shul about kashrus. He was talking about dairy equipment. So let's say Oreos. By the way, I wouldn't say that every Oreo product is necessarily dairy equipment. The OU says you should really check it out, but it's pretty standard, that let's say your regular Oreos is dairy equipment. So if I have a Fleischigs meal and I have regular Oreos, I can serve those Oreos on my Fleischigs dessert dishes. The one thing I can't do, Rabbi Blech said, is I can't wrap it in a piece of pastrami. That's the thing. Whereas I can't eat it directly with Fleischigs, but I can have it on meat dishes. Now, I want to clarify if I'm the one making the item, okay, if I'm the one making the item, so generally speaking, if I'm making the item in dairy equipment, it should be that my plan is not to eat it, or that my plan is not to use it with meat dishes. There is an exception to that, but I don't want to go too much into the weeds because I'm worried I'm going to be misunderstood. So again, the bottom line is if I'm making an item with dairy equipment, the normal halacha is if I'm making it for a fleischigs meal, I shouldn't be making it in dairy equipment, even though it's parv. Okay. Now I want to say two caveats to that. If I'm making sharp foods like onions in dairy equipment, that's a whole different story. And that I may not either. If I have some onion salad that I make in dairy equipment, I may not have that on Fleischig's dishes. Definitely not. Okay. The other thing I want to mention is even though we say that if I make it in dairy equipment, if I made it in dairy equipment with intent to use it at a dairy meal, and then there was leftover, then I can actually eat it on Fleischig's dishes. But again, as long as we're not talking about sharp foods, John, I hope I was clear about that. Was okay, great. Um, Good question. May one reheat a slice of pizza in a meat oven? Um, there are many that are lenient about that. There are many that are lenient about that. Um, if you ask me personally, it sort of depends what mood I'm in the moment. But there are definitely many that are lenient about that. Yeah, it's reasonable. It's reasonable to be lenient about that. Okay. These are really great questions, both the submitted ones and the chats. Anyone want to call anything out that maybe we didn't get to? Mrs. Price?
Yeah, just one comment on what was said at the very beginning about buying cut fruit in stores like Costco or Giant.
Sure.
Um, no question about buying when it's something like cantaloupe, honeydew, mangoes. What one has to watch out for is you don't buy strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, because they are more prone to bugs and really need to be checked. Buying cut strawberries and shaloms, matis is fine because they have a mashgiach that
Checking it.
that is checking on it. But you just have to be selective as to what cut fruit you buy in a regular grocery store.
I think that was great. Thank you. Thank you for raising that. Thank you very much. Um, Lior, thank you for putting that in. If everything is going to be cold, the question asked is, may a person make dessert in dairy dishes? And the plan is to eat it after a meat meal. You could certainly make dessert in dairy dishes to be eaten after a meat meal, 100%. Um, I wonder if the question is, may you make it in dairy dishes to eat it on meat dishes? I wonder if that's also part of the question. I would say if everything's cold, it's reasonable. Um, but certainly if it's going to be like sharp food or something like that, or something you're going to have hot, definitely not. Yeah, thank you for raising that. Any other questions that anybody wants to call out? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Really a very interesting discussion. Thank you for making it interesting. Um, just a general question. I'm happy if nobody has any ideas, that's okay. But thank God we've been doing this long enough that we're always looking for some other ideas. Anyone, you could put it in the chat, you could call it out. Any requests for another topic for an Ask the Rabbi? Okay. Um, okay. If a person covers their meat in a meat oven, yeah, if your meat is covered, but what I mean by covered is like, no steam is escaping or anything, and you bake cookies, yes, you may consider the cookies parve. Yes, yes, that's a good question. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Be well. Menashe, thanks for recording. Thank you very much.